I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Summer.
And you're listening to Broke and Broken.
Because we're both.
The podcast about living your best life by getting real.
Welcome back, broken people. Today we have Annie Slasher. She's an artist and a blogger. And she opened up to us about some really personal stuff, part of which was the time that her children spent in foster care. So Stephanie, before we move into the interview, I wanted to talk to you for a moment about this because you and I have both been foster parents, you more recently than I,
Yes.
But we've both been there. We both understand that the point of fostering is to help, hopefully, keep families together and reunify. But one comment that Annie made during this was that it felt like, even as the parent who was just doing everything she could, she was busting her ass to get things together so she could get her kids back. And it felt like everybody in that system, from the caseworkers to the foster homes, were actively working against her. And
that's because it's often true.
Absolutely.
It's often true.
And I mean, I know you and I talked about this online debate that we saw where some foster parents were actually thought it was justified. The complaint was that the parent, when they called for phone visitation to talk to their child, the parent used curse words. Not in an abusive way. They weren't being abusive. They just said these, quote, whatever, inappropriate words. And for one, let me just say,
they were talking about the system, and the system it's
it
very
is
messed up. Yeah,
and
it's absolutely, and so it's an appropriate usage of the words in the situation, and it's a great way to vent frustration about a very broken system.
And I just want to say I'm glad that nobody thinks that it's okay, acceptable to cut off my contact with my children for saying fuck, because I tell you what, I absolutely do say things like that in front of them.
Yes.
It does not harm them. It does not damage them. But you know what does harm them? Keeping children from talking to their parents. So let's talk, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about that. These fosters who are deliberately undermining the parents, and I mean, I know you've seen it as well as I have, sharing tricks and tips on how to move things towards termination and undermine of these parental rights and undermine these parents so that these children cannot go home.
It's I want to start out by saying, if anybody who is listening who has considered becoming a foster parent or a caretaker, we desperately need you. I can't stress it enough. If you've got a bed and you've got a drawer and you're healthy enough to love, we need you, because these are some of the situations that we deal with. I'm on several forums. I've been asked to be in forums because, as Indigenous women, these families often need to have exposure to, because they have zero ties. ICWA is not always implemented the way that it can and should be, and therefore we oftentimes will find our children have been placed into white families. From the bottom of my heart, I wish that these people would be educated from day one. Their role is to be a temporary caretaker and to help facilitate healing between the child and the parent and the family. In my experience, the reason they are going into foster care is because they want to adopt children.
Right. And
they're not there to best meet the needs of the child.
Right.
They're not there to bridge a gap between them and their family and their culture. In fact, if anything, we see time and time again that they're disdaining the child's culture, not seeing that they are directly harming the child.
Oh,
they do so.
I saw a parent use the phrase "the tribe" as if it was a pejorative the other day. I started angry tweeting about it because it's ridiculous.
Yes.
Like, if you feel that way about the child's
then you're an
people,
inappropriate placement.
And I tweeted that. I said, you should not have that child. You are not an appropriate placement for that child. And then I went back and responded to my own tweet later, and I said, on second thought, I think you should close your home, because I don't want you influencing any child.
Yes. Well,
but I did. I was going to say, I think you give them a little too much credit in saying that I wish they were informed from the beginning, because in my experience, and I took my foster classes many years apart, because the two girls, even though they're sisters, they came at many years apart. Both times, around, we were told from the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
your job is to bridge, your job is to help facilitate reunification, to help these kids maintain bonds with their family. You are
Mm-hmm.
told all of those, at least in Oklahoma. And Oklahoma has a reputation for being one of the worst systems. So I'd imagine they're probably getting this other places as well. I think
Well,
they're
you've got to.
ignoring
Mm-hmm.
it because
In,
they
but
are
in
going in for filling a void in themselves rather than with the priority of helping these children.
Yes, and in Oklahoma as well, and I don't know if this is still the case, but it was when I was there. There are churches who have contracts with the state, and their training can look just entirely different from what you would expect from DHS, which is more secular, than if you're looking at a Lutheran, Catholic, or a Baptist contract foster
We
situation.
are, as a state, moving towards a lot more private agencies, which I object to, but nobody cares
Mm-hmm.
what I think.
Yes.
But the training is supposed to be standardized. So they are
Okay.
supposed to have that. Now, unfortunately, we did recently pass law where they can discriminate where these religious institutions, which, in my opinion, I'll state for the record, I don't believe that religious institutions have any business being involved in this. You shouldn't be playing your religion into placing children.
And
Um,
they shouldn't even be, I have seen some agencies successfully navigate more so than others. And so, for a long time, Lutheran Social Services did emergency sheltering for the state of Oklahoma. And so, I did see a successful program there. But when you look at the history of, boarding schools and child removal and genocide, this is particularly problematic. So to swing
well,
back over to the conversation that we were talking about, the parent was talking to the child
yes.
and swore about DHS, and there was a long discussion that followed thereafter of foster parents saying, this is offensive to me and not in my home, and so I'm absolutely cutting off the contact with their parent until a judge tells me otherwise. How did that make you feel?
That is not in the best interest of the child. And if you cannot, the thing is, and that's what I told that person, was cursing does not harm this child. And the
Mm-hmm.
needs of the child are more important than your
Then
wants, which is, I'm uncomfortable hearing the word fuck. Well, fucking get
yes,
over it, because this
yes,
child's needs are more important than your
mm-hmm.
delicate sensibilities. Go
Yes,
clutch your pearls and faint on the couch and call it a
mm-hmm.
day. But you do not get to sever a bond
Yes,
between a parent and their child because you
yes.
don't like the word they use. And if
Well,
you
mm-hmm.
feel entitled to do that,
Then they're
you
an
are
inappropriate
not
fit.
appropriate for fostering, because
I agree.
fostering is about helping this child with their trauma, because it is inherently traumatic to be removed
To
from your
remove,
family,
yes,
no
yes, and
matter
to
what.
discriminate
Yes,
against their family is also extremely problematic. When you are othering the parent and
right.
calling the parent inappropriate, let's not even pretend like that's not throwing dirt at the child. They identify strongly with their mother, their father, their siblings, their aunts, their uncles, and their grandparents. And when these people have such strong feelings against the original culture and state of their family, it is inherently harmful, and it creates a situation of dissonance. It
Right.
distances the child from what is best for them, which is a connection to their family.
And I also felt like there were some people who were getting defensive at the fact
They
that I
absolutely
kept,
were.
but
Mm-hmm.
at the fact that just something as simple as the fact that I kept calling this child's parent their parent. If you notice,
Yes.
there was a lot of the birth mom or the bio mom. And I'm like, no,
Yes.
that is
These
that
children have never
child's
been
mother.
adopted. Yes. That's why
You are a paid
mm-hmm.
caretaker, and I know that upsets
Yes.
people and I know that offends people, but I'm telling you from
But
somebody who did it for
yes.
years. I was a paid caretaker. Did I love them?
Yes.
Absolutely. I still love them
Yes.
very much. And would it have broken my heart into a million pieces if they had had to leave my house? Absolutely. Would I have done
Yes.
everything I could to make that a healthy transition and handover? Absolutely, because that's what would have been in the
Yes.
best interest of my girls. I
Well,
wish there
and
had
if
been a
they
way to
are,
keep them with their
mhm,
mother.
if they
There's
are
just
so
wasn't.
uncomfortable with the facts and the realities of the situation, if their feelings are so sensitive that they cannot be called that which they are, which is a paid caretaker, they are getting a paid set dollar amount to keep that child in their home each and every day, then they're not fit to deal with the difficulties and challenges that arise with parenting a tribe who has been removed from their family, which, even if nothing else has happened, even if they had no grandparents and the parents just died, that is horrifically
Right.
traumatic. Anytime you remove a child, it is inherently harmful.
Today we have Annie. She is an artist and a blogger and a all around incredible person. So Annie, tell us about your art and your blog.
Okay, my blog focuses on reviewing adult urban fantasy, sci-fi, comics, and novels. And typically, or sometimes, there's paranormal romance or romance involved, is like a subgenre as well. And then my art, I have worked my design art mostly. I do beaded jewelry and wire wrapping stones and kind of whatever I feel like. And some photography, but that's kind of been put on the back burner, but I like doing the photography too.
Oh, me too. I used to have my camera with me everywhere I went, and I don't think I've actually taken a photo with it in a couple months. So we're gonna have to get back to that.
I know. I'm excited. Like I said, trip. There needs to be a full plan, so we're all behind the lens.
There does. We need to make a trip to Colorado soon, and we can just take photos all along the way.
I agree.
Okay, so you have a couple of kids too, right?
I do.
How fun is this whole teenage parenting thing? Because I'm over it.
Loads of fun. So much fun. Not really.
Do you ever want to just like sell them or pay someone to take them or something? Because
I just feel like everything you do is wrong. Number one. Number two, you are always judged constantly by everybody on your kids. What they say,
That's
what
true.
they do, they act. Everything is a reflection of you directly, which is not fun.
That's a good point. I tell people all the time when I hear them say, "Oh, I want a baby" or whatever. I'm like, okay, babies are cute, and this is the universe's trick to keep you from killing them, and then you get paid back because no good deed goes unpunished. You get paid back by them turning into teenagers. And
It is. You remember like when they were little, and you remember thinking, "Oh, this will be so much easier when they're older."
Oh yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and you'll have so much time. And then every year you realize that was bullshit.
Right? I totally, because, my older two are 15 and 17. And I completely understand now why my grandmother's generation married their kids off at 14. Because that's about the time you can't stand them anymore and you just want them the fuck out of your house.
Yes.
And I love them. But yeah, my 17-year-old decided to get mouthy with me yesterday. And he bowed up to me by text message. I'm like, don't think I'm going to forget. Just because you can do this, just because I'm not in the same room with you. Because I'm not going to forget. And you're going to have to be in the same room with me again.
And especially being a mom of a son, you just feel like there's this constant background fear that they're going to turn into these boys and men that are so toxic.
Right.
And it's just that whole thing of, oh my gosh, is this a warning sign that I'm raising fucking Brock Turner?
Yes.
Luckily, so far, I don't see that, but you always have that moment where you're like, ah! No.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that's why I don't freak out so much about some of the other stuff. Like, I mean, I call the 15-year-old Cheech because catching him with the weed and stuff like that. I'm like, you know what? If this is the worst you do, I'm good. Like,
yeah, exactly.
I will fight. I will fight with you about why I don't want you to kill your brain cells. But as long as that's our biggest issue, we're good. Like, because like you said, that Brock Turner sort of thing, fear is always back there in my head, and I'm like, I will have to kill you myself, like, if you do that, kid. So
I know, and I am not one of those parents who justifies everything that their kids do, even when they were little. And so I'm very realistic. And I know that I would never make excuses for them, but it's still like that conflict of, oh, you need to protect them, and oh, hey, adult, and there's consequences for your actions, and suck it up.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the balance somewhere between consequences for your actions, but I'm trying to keep you out of jail too. I mean, if he did something horrendous, I would do it, but then there's nothing I can do. But yeah, I had to pull him out of school when we still lived in another town because of the weed, and I'm like, I'm just trying to keep you out of prison, kid. Like, this is where the bar is at right now.
Age, we're even worried about that. It shouldn't even be. We shouldn't be ticketing kids. Mine, got a ticket for tobacco in school, and it was like, I mean, with an actual ticket. Like,
so how does that work? How does that work? Like, how can they give fines in the school? I don't understand how that works.
Here, anyway, so I'm in North Texas, so we're in a country suburb, kind of, outside the suburbs in a country, in a small town in Texas. And here, they pretty much, it's all at the discretion of the principal. So the principal one time can give somebody, 2 days of ISS. And another kid, they can literally have the cop issue them a minor in possession of tobacco ticket and then give them whatever consequence too. So I just don't see that that's productive, even with the weed and tickets. Like, I don't see how that long term discourages kids from making better choices.
I don't either.
Sometimes.
Right? I always kind of figure a fine just means that it's okay as long as you're rich enough to pay for it.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing is, fines, but that's not really a consequence to the kid.
Well, no. But a lot of things they do aren't, as far as trying to police minors' behaviors.
Yeah. So, I felt the same way. I was like, hey, if this is the worst thing he does, at this point, I'll
right? And, like, tobacco, I mean, how old is he again? I can't remember.
He's 15. That happened, he must have been 14.
Okay. I remember what we were doing at that age. Our kids are angels.
We're pretty good. And he has much better, but he's really sporty, and so he's very sport focused, which does kind of put the kibosh on a lot of the stuff I did and we did, because they drug test, and they were drug testing. I'm not sure in middle school, but I know they were drug testing.
They drug test
if you were in anything for sports. Oh God, yes.
Wow.
He gets drug tested probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 times a year, probably.
Of course, that wouldn't have been a deterrent to us because we weren't in sports.
Well, I remember exactly.
We didn't do anything productive.
My senior year, when I changed high schools, they told me even if I joined the chess club, they would have a right to drug test me. So I literally didn't do anything, and that's sad.
Chess club?
You shouldn't be. Like literally, if you were in anything they considered extracurricular, they would have a right to drug test you. And so I didn't do anything.
I wouldn't have
the
either.
Consequence there's huge.
I wouldn't have either. I mean, I can't focus to play chess without being stoned, so I don't know how that's supposed to work.
I mean, how can you justify, like joining the science club or the debate team and drug testing people? To me, it's crazy. You should be trying to include kids in things regardless of that period, because the more social structure and the better support they have, then they're not going to be inclined to do those things.
Or there's some of us, okay, I remember, and I know the listeners aren't aware, Annie and I went to a few years of high school together, so that's how we first knew each other a bazillion years ago. And I remember my senior year, I would come pick you up before school, and we would go drive around that little 2-mile square back there by Belzoni Cemetery, because nobody's back there and there's no traffic, and we would go drive around there and get high and then go to school.
Yeah.
And that is literally because, I was still, I have PTSD, had not processed any of that trauma. That was literally the only way I could make it to school. If it hadn't been for the weed, I would not have been in school. I would have dropped out. So.
Yeah, I don't know how I would have been either, because I did really good and you did really good in school.
Oh, yeah.
And so the whole thing of, that's a good question. If I wouldn't have been able to do that, who knows what school actually actually would have looked like for me. I don't think it would, sadly, and I'm not encouraging children to smoke pot, okay? I'm just saying with Katie, and when you have other stuff going on,
right,
I don't think that my grades and everything else would have been as good as they were if I wouldn't have had some kind of self-medication, unfortunately.
same, absolutely. Because it wasn't for lack of trying. I tried to get help. My parents told me no, so
Yeah.
then I had to. The only other option was to self-medicate until I could move out, which I did right after high school when I was 17. But so yeah,
Yeah.
I think when they make these policies, they fail to consider all factors when they make no tolerance policies.
Well, I just think society's general view, especially on marijuana, okay, society's view is a little not up probably with where it should be on things like that. That's for sure.
True. That's true. And I think that's the case too of all substances, really, because you and I've talked a lot about addiction, and because we've dealt with a lot of people in our life who've had substance abuse and addiction issues, and the attitudes and the way people think and act towards that, it can be quite damaging and definitely unhelpful. So
yes.
Why do you think that is?
I think that it's just like a cultural stigma of it. I think right now, for whatever reason, like, okay, you look at like the 70s and it was much more accepted. It was viewed a little more of like, like we would view alcohol right now.
Okay.
As a way to relax, as a way to chill, blah, blah, blah. And, the addicts were kind of those severe cases. But we've got nothing but worse. And I think a lot of it is the social pressures and the social aspects of kind of getting away from basic social support and family support and all of that. Those are big things. And it's really not, we're just so busy. We're so damn busy anymore. But I don't know. I think it affects everybody's mentality, and those of us that are already probably prone to things like anxiety or don't have great family structures and support. That's kind of what happens, especially I think with teenagers. I know it was definitely with me was not having I had a little family support, but not having really support necessarily in a parental view. I started hanging out with other people who also needed family, and those tended to be people who were using.
Right.
And then it's kind of a downward spiral from there because you get sucked into other things, and that was totally my choice. But I think that's what happens. And I don't know, I think even right now, like if you look at, what is it, like Al-Anon? It's not Al-Anon. Oh, it's like FA, which is like Families Anonymous.
Okay.
Even with how they kind of preach and teach parents or other people and family members how to deal with it, I'm not sure. I used to agree with it, the whole, if they're using, you don't have anything to do with them. And I'm not sure that really and truly studies have backed up that that's really what's best for everybody.
I think so.
That people who tend to come out of it are people who had support available. And it's really hard to get that if you're an addict. Most of the time, your families turn your back on you. Even if you want to get help, there's this whole thing of you're never going to get it.
Right.
You don't really want it, or you're just doing that because you got caught or something like that. And then that just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I think you're right. The data isn't showing that that's necessarily effective. In fact, it's showing the opposite more. We used to think of addiction as a strictly chemical problem, but now we're seeing more and more that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's human connection. And you can't get clean and stay clean without that connection. And then also dealing with whatever underlying issues are there.
Yeah.
So
many people get clean and they're still addicts.
Yes.
Whether they switch to God or
I saw that a lot as a
maybe
preacher's
it's
kid.
even something. Well, we do. We do. And even sometimes it's healthy stuff, which is great, but a lot of the times it's really not dealing with, the center of why you chose to escape reality.
Right, and I think the problem with substituting, even if it's religion, because that's one thing that a lot of people think is wonderful and healthy, well, they switch to God and they go to church and whatever. But the problem is, unless they're actually dealing with the underlying issue and getting actual coping mechanisms, then it's not a long-term solution. And that's why people end up with this continual cycle of, because once whatever that new dependency is doesn't fulfill the need, and none of them ever will fully, if they don't learn the skills to deal with that, then you're just going to flip back into another form of addiction, and it creates
Yep.
this cycle. And I think that's part of the family problem too, because when you're going through those cycles, you know, people, you lie, you do all sorts of things to support that, and so you burn all those bridges, and everybody's burnt out, and they don't want to deal with you, and they don't want to help you, and they don't believe you when you say you want help again for the 30th time.
Yeah.
And I get it. It can be hard. You know, I've been there and helped. I mean, you knew through the whole thing I was helping a friend try to get clean. We went through what? 3 rounds of detox, 2 on his own, and then the third as an outpatient clinic. And, you know, he was clean for a good 4 months. And then he relapsed again, and I don't hear from him anymore. I haven't heard from him in about 4 or 5 months now. So, because I think he feels a lot of guilt and shame when he talks to me because of everything that we went through trying to get him clean. And, you know, hopefully someday he will get clean. But that's one of the issues that I saw with him was even when he would be physically clean and sober, developing those skills and how to cope with life, he doesn't have those. And so, and over time he had lost all of his connections because he had shut everyone out. So there's just no support system there. There's no safety net.
Well, and the guilt, you know, because like I was an addict. I mean, I did pretty much everything. It didn't really start until after high school. I just smoked pot in high school, but after high school, you know, I was just like a downward spiral deep. You know, I did almost every drug. Did not do heroin. I never did ecstasy. But basically, it's way easier to cut out those 2 things I didn't do.
Right.
And I pretty much did them every way possible. I mean, it just, it was, that was, I went down there. And I still, the guilt you carry from knowing how you affected other people. And, you know, I had other issues that caused, you know, when the 2 were really little, when my children were really little. And the guilt you carry around is nobody is harder on themselves from an addict's point of view than that addict.
Right.
If they're really clean and better, that guilt is, it's still, I mean, for me, it's been, I think I've been clean over 13 years, and it's still, if I just sit down and think about it, it's still this huge cloud of guilt because you can't change it. You cannot change those mistakes or how maybe you hurt people and the consequences, just even putting your life that far behind. There's nothing you can do. You can only move forward, make your life better. But getting rid of that guilt, man, if somebody knows how to do that, you can let me know because I still haven't fucking managed that one.
Now, it's been a while.
Oh my God.
Right. It's been a while for you. Do you have anybody like in your family or in your life that brings up those things from the past? Because I know that's a problem for some people.
Probably not as much. Sometimes dealing with my mother makes me just, she's like the one sensitive one because I feel like more of a parent to her sometimes.
Right.
Good God, if she's listening to this, she'll never forgive me. But it's true.
We'll never tell her.
she needs a lot, and I don't ever necessarily think about using, but it is definitely what made me realize much later why I did, because she needs a lot, and I'm not necessarily don't have the mentality or the mental ability to deal with somebody that needs me that much. You know, like that's just how I am. And so I did realize, oh, good Lord, no wonder I spiraled out of it. And that was definitely not her. It was me. I think with me, definitely, it was like the defining moment of I'd had the same boyfriend basically from, I don't know, 8th grade. And then we broke up my senior year. We got back together, and then he left me for this other girl. And it was that whole severance of what I had visioned my future to be like. Like I had totally just seen it, even though it may not have been like fully mapped out. And his family, I was so close with, even his younger siblings, and I just felt like they were my family. And so being severed from that definitely was like that instant defining moment of just not caring. I just didn't care anymore. I really did not give a shit about myself or about anything. And it was, my mom had left my senior year, and I stayed, down there where we were in Southeast Oklahoma by myself. I had no family, nobody. and it was just, it was very dark.
So that was the beginning of the spiral?
Oh, definitely, yep.
So,
and that's not, I definitely don't place blame on him. It's definitely just the whole letting yourself kind of become consumed by somebody and putting so much stock in how I had visioned my, after 18, kind of going out on your own adult life, and then it was ripped away, and so it was just totally lost.
And you didn't know how to deal with that.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So that's how it started. How did you find your way out?
Oh my goodness. This is super trained. A lot of people, trust me, even other addicts, totally. This is like a line that so many addicts will even judge other addicts for.
Mm-hmm.
So I was pregnant with my youngest, and I was clean pretty much the whole time, and we moved back in with my mother. And I started using at the very end and got caught when they induced me. I tested positive. Okay. So they took her from me at the hospital, and they took both of them, clearly. And so it was like a 6-month process of jumping through hoops, and it was a miracle that we even got them back that soon. My only real saving grace was that luckily the attorney could see, like, my oldest was very mentally healthy, very developed, very, very, very well cared for, very bonded to both me and his dad, and that held a lot of weight. There was clear that even though that had happened, that he was very well cared for, and neglect, even though it was neglect, because they just consider if you're using as a parent here, it's neglect, but that he wasn't neglected, and he was bonded, and everything was very age appropriate. We knew how to parent. And so that was when I was just like, that's it, I'm done. Right. Just the trauma of, having somebody take your newborn away. Well, certainly that was a serious awakening. And I had to make a choice. It was, do I give up my whole life and my kids, or do I decide from here on out I'm done? And I was done. Right.
And some people can't make that choice as much as they want to. I see a lot of parents who at that point actually creates a harder spiral because they don't know how to cope, and they don't know how to pull themselves out of that.
Yeah. I was lucky. I think I'm one of those people where if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to prove you wrong. And there was absolutely a lot of that from kind of everybody of, you screwed this up and now you're never going to be anything. Right. And you're never going to come out of this and blah, blah, blah. And so I think that's part of probably where my motivation came from, was literally, yeah, I'll show you. And I pretty much did. I mean, definitely I still had fault, but I definitely, that was just it, and that is what made it easy.
Right. And you did amazing. You've built a great life for yourself. Can you comment on how hard it is as a parent in that system to get services? Because that's the big misconception, I think, and I complain about this a lot as a social worker and as a former foster parent, but I don't think people believe me. A primary reason in a lot of cases that parents don't get their kids back isn't for lack of trying. It's lack of resources, and they can't get programs, and they can't get the help they need.
Yeah, here, because even though we were living back in Oklahoma, we were living here when I had insurance. We'd only been living back in Oklahoma with my mom for about a month. Mm-hmm. So all of the insurance and everything was here in Texas, and she was born here in Texas. So Texas was actually the one who came and intervened. They do fairly well here. Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like it was still a huge challenge to get services, but it was really hard. I had, quote, been clean too long to do anything inpatient.
Right.
Okay, like literally they'll tell you, well, if you go use and come back, we can take you, which is fucking ridiculous. Yeah. And I mean, and so there's outpatient, but normally you end up on a waiting list. They want you to do like parenting classes, same thing, there's a waiting list. They consider here 6 months is as soon as you can get a kid back once they've been removed. Right. And you're lucky, it is absolute luck if you can actually accomplish all those things in the 6 months.
Oh, yes.
Now, at that point in time, I had stayed with my mom there, and there actually was drug services there, and they were actually really good, and they were based on my income. Mm-hmm. So Texas let me do my rehab through Oklahoma there, and I was really lucky and had a really good counselor, and she moved me really, along and could see that I was super self-aware. And so I ended up being really lucky that I got everything done and we got ourselves situated quick enough for all of that to go as well as it did. But it was hard. I mean, here I will say I think they may be better definitely than Oklahoma about services, but you still feel like everybody's your enemy. Instead of them helping, it's this constant, well, jump through this hoop, oh, well, jump through this hoop. And I'm still not sure that removing children in situations like that is necessarily in anybody's best interest.
Right.
Unless the kids are being, physically beaten or molested or something like that, I still think the same outcome would have applied if there would have been in-house treatment services that were provided while the children were still in the home.
Yes, the family preservation services. I agree, and the data backs that up. Removal is a huge trauma in itself. In fact, if you there are some studies, which I wish I had pulled up now, that show that removal is oftentimes reported as the most traumatic event in a foster child's life, including whatever abuse or neglect they were enduring in their home.
Here, a lot of people, may be lucky enough to have family that take them, and they didn't want the kids to go to my mom because she was in Oklahoma and that's where we were living. They didn't want the kids to go out of state. And then my husband's family was like, oh, we're too old, but then filed for custody of his oldest one. It was ridiculous.
Wait. They said they were too old to take your kids, but they filed for custody of his older daughter.
Yeah, they did.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Because CPS ended up getting with his ex-wife are totally separate. She was basically domestic violencing her husband to the point where CPS intervened. And so they filed, and actually we ended up with custody of her as well at the end of a year. We'd been clean a year and ended up with her, and even CPS testified that she was healthier in our care than anybody else.
Do you know why they were willing to file for custody of her but not your children?
I mean, she's just always kind of been a favorite, and I really try not to speculate about why somebody would let, a 2-year-old and a newborn go into foster care and then file for custody of another one. But
I just wondered if they had said something over the years.
Luckily we had some a little more expanded families, like my husband's cousin and his wife, who were about his age. They ended, I guess they're older. They spent 10 years older, 15 years older than him, and they actually ended up finally being approved for family placement because everybody else hum-hawed around. Well, if they don't get them back, then what happens? And it was like, CPS didn't want to hear that. So, luckily we ended up having them moved into a family placement, but in the beginning, that is absolutely not what happened. And his family, some of his family even fought that placement, which was crazy.
They fought the family placement?
They fought the internal family. It would have been my husband's mother. They really didn't want the kids to go with his cousin. It was really weird.
Well, if you're not going to take them, I don't think you get a say where they go.
I know. Try not to. You try so hard not to speculate about other people's crazy and how they justify things that they did.
Right.
And but I don't know. That's but definitely once they got in the family placement, it was better. But I just don't. And now at my job, so I'm working for an attorney. A few years after that, I'm still at the same office there. I've been there 11 years. We work with CPS clients for a long time. She was appointed routinely on CPS cases. And, that's just what I saw. Most of the cases that they were taking kids, especially here, are all drug-related, and very few of them were abused. It was ridiculous.
Yes. I saw a case recently. The child was literally removed for one joint in the house, and we're not even clear on the timeline because they were reported by family members, so we've never even been clear on the timeline as to whether the child was actually in the house when the drugs were in the house. But literally the child was removed for one joint and they lost their child.
And there was a lot of push from the family too that my husband and I could not be together and stay clean. And at one point we lived separately, and then my mom kind of booted me out just because I don't know. It was my
Just
mom.
because it's your mom,
And
yes.
well, yeah, it's one of those things
I
where
know.
just like everybody's kicking you when you're down, when you're
Right.
trying so hard. And his family is the one who ended up taking me in, and we did. We've been clean together, and he still dealt with alcohol with him later. But
Right.
I mean, all in all, that whole, I'm not so sure I agree with that mindset either. Maybe for some people, but I know for me that I was going to be clean regardless. And if
Which
he would have used,
mindset
I just would have left.
that you can't stay clean if you're together? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if they preach that there, but that was a big thing kind of here.
I don't know that in CPS. I don't know that they really have a stated preference on that. Pretty much the only time they tell you you have to leave them is if it's a domestic violence issue. And even
Yes.
sometimes then they're wishy-washy
Yeah.
on that. I'm not sure what the current, as far as like social work and substance abuse, what their recommendations are. I don't think that there is an absolute idea of you have to be separate or anything like that. I think they try to work on the idea of not splintering your support system unless you have to.
Yeah. And it's really hard because you definitely feel like, especially because I'm white and my kids were white, that they were considered very adoptable.
Oh,
you know,
absolutely.
like they were puppies,
and
like
their
they
age.
were full-breed puppies, and everybody wanted them, and that was terrifying. I mean, it was just this terrifying thought to think that I'm gonna have to fight somebody.
Oh yes.
You know, to get my kids back.
Yeah. And their age, especially, they're super adoptable
yes, exactly.
at that age. I see.
Yeah, newborn and a 2-year-old. Right. Are you kidding me?
And you're right about the race, because I don't know how many people are aware of the in private adoption there are actually sliding scale fees based on race, and a healthy white baby makes the most money. Yeah. And so because there's the most demand, and it's the same way in foster care. There's a lot of people who go into foster care to adopt.
It's like I feel like they do with dogs, like this adopt, yes. Like foster to adopt thing. That it's total. It is not basically the bar you're setting. Is our goal isn't really to keep families together.
Absolutely.
Our goal is really not to help. You know,
absolutely.
The goal is we're going to set you up for failure. It's really hard too, because even the counseling, the counseling is still, they're all going to report to your caseworkers.
Right, and so you're afraid.
I don't know how well your therapy and counseling is working when you know everything you say can be used against you.
Right, so you're going to tell them what they want to hear. So.
Yeah, or at the very least, you're definitely probably not going to deal with some severe issues like a lot of people have, because it brings up other red lights,
right?
To other things, huge other red flags. Like, let's say if you were molested and you needed to talk about that in therapy, maybe that's why you were an addict. Well, you can't say that when you're going through social services, because then it totally becomes, oh, maybe this has happened to her kids too.
Right. They put it down as another risk factor.
They do, exactly. Yeah. And that's just, I mean, luckily I didn't have that, but I mean, I know from cases at work and everything else, you just know realistically that that's going to come up, and those people are not going to want to realistically deal with their real problems for these services they're being offered if it's just going to become fodder to use against you in a case later.
And so then you just end up with people who still aren't being able to address the issues they have, because most of them, when they're out of the system and can't get services through that system, most people can't afford proper mental health services. So they're not going to be able to continue therapy once they're through that.
No, and here, and some of the counties are better than other counties here, but I mean, like where we're at, because we're in a poor county, there are no services. There's none. It doesn't matter. There's zero mental health services. And that is terrifying, because how many of these people are using, or potentially, anything, even alcohol, whatever, or staying in bad relationships, or, have toxic people in their lives because they need mental health services or prescriptions, even in some of the cases, and they don't have the ability to get them, even if they want the help.
Right.
And then they end up in jail, and we end up paying for it anyways.
Right. Only they're more traumatized and their family's more fractured, and it's created this. I say that a lot because, my girls, they have the same mother, and I say that a lot. I feel like their situation is, in a lot of ways, because the system failed their mother. She's not a
Yeah.
horrible person. She does have some deficiencies that I don't really think are any fault of her own for the most part, to be honest. And I think the system failed her. And that's the reason why she's not. I mean, she loves her children. She's just not actually capable of taking care of them.
Yes.
And you know, in her family, it is a generational cycle with CPS. And
Yes.
I'm trying not to say too much because I don't want to, you know, to like out her to the world here, but it is a problem. And I feel like if the system hadn't failed for the last 2 generations,
Yeah.
these children wouldn't have gone through what they went through, and they might have been able to stay with their mother.
Yeah. Yeah. Better skills learned, everything. Ability to obtain job skills is huge, but there's really not the focus on that. It's unfortunate, and I don't see how it's productive. Everybody wants to bring up like some kind of budget, but the reality is, I think there's way more money spent doing how we're doing it right now
Oh,
versus
absolutely.
trying to help. In the beginning by offering those things, it pays itself back.
I feel like a certain amount of it is probably the same way, like we were talking about the way people look at addicts. I think parents in the child welfare system, it's the same sort of thing. People look at them and they have this idea of them in their head, and they just want to punish them. They don't want to help them, and they don't want to keep the family together, but they're more than happy to punish them and make life hard for them.
Oh yeah, yeah, and yes, absolutely. I think so. I mean, they just make it where it's almost impossible. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
crazy.
Yeah, I had a when my younger daughter first came to live with me, her mother was in prison. It wasn't her mother's fault that she got taken into foster care. She was not the one who created that situation. She wasn't there. And that caseworker sat in my living room and told me, I don't think these parents deserve a second chance. If you messed up, you shouldn't have another chance to get your kids back. I'm like, but you're talking about punishing children for the rest of their life by never letting them have contact with their families. I don't care. They're
Yeah.
bad. They're just bad people. I'm like, you need to find a different job because you should not be
Well,
in
and
this
I
line of
think
work.
yeah, and I think here, for a long time, it was I mean, it's sad that it was kind of a joke within the lawyer community, but this whole, because, Northeast Dallas is,
Hmm.
upper class, kind of middle upper class, and very, conservative, and there was this whole view of you had to, quote, be the perfect parent
Mm,
to get your kids back. And I'm like, nobody's a fucking perfect parent. I mean, nobody is.
right.
That's impossible. And you cannot set the standard for people who already are disadvantaged higher than a general population. It's ridiculous.
Oh, but they
And you
do.
see it all the time, but they do. The standard becomes so high, it becomes unobtainable.
Right.
And they don't know how. Their parenting probably wasn't real great. And it's just, I mean, here it was like, sometimes we see these cases where you're just like, oh my goodness. Now, the last 4 or 5 years, I think that they've gotten in trouble for it, and so they've kind of slacked off on some of it, and they've quit doing that. But it's absolutely true. It's like you have to have this, white picket fence kind of life for you to regain your children, which is crazy.
And a certain standard of living.
Yeah, that
I've
too.
seen cases where they don't want to return the children because they may not have running water in the house, but they may have a well to draw from right outside the back door. And the
Yeah,
social worker's fighting putting a child back. They have clean water. What the fuck is wrong with you? Why would you cut a child off from their family for that? Or I saw it was going to adjudication. They hadn't been determined deprived children yet, but I saw the photos from the removal, and the removal claim was unsafe living conditions. And I looked at the photos of the house, and I'm like, so there's like a mattress propped up against the wall because they have family that stays there, that crashes there sometimes. So they like throw the mattress down in the living room. They have like several loads of clean laundry on the couch. You know, I mean, none of it was hazardous. It was just messy, and they were poor. So the house is kind of run down, but it's not dangerous. And so literally they took these children out because they're busy and they're poor.
Yeah.
But the caseworker could not understand why that was problematic. And I'm like, at any given point in time, you can go to I have 4 children in my house because my oldest one doesn't stay here. He stays with my parents now. At any given time, you can walk into my house and it's likely to look like that because there's 4 children in this house. You know, and it looks like
how human beings are supposed to live in today's society and not be crazy, because we're expected to work full time. Moms,
right?
We're expected to, do all the house stuff, do all the stuff with their kids who are supposed to be in all kinds of fucking activities, and it's like this never-ending cycle.
Right. And don't mess up or they'll take your children.
Yeah, right.
I mean, literally, I had a few months ago, someone called. I don't know. I had CPS. I guess apparently my son's father had been reported for whatever. I don't know. They don't ever tell you clear answers on what the report was. But when there's a report on a child, they investigate both houses. And I have seen so many unjustified removals that's terrifying to me, even though I know in my head everything on that checklist is perfectly fine in my house. It's still sheer terror for that 30 days until they finish that report. Because whoever reported, that's the thing, I will not report on a child unless there's like imminent danger to the child. Because the reality is, they risk not only my youngest son, they risked all my children.
Yep.
Being removed from my house for no reason. And of course, it came back unsubstantiated. Like I said, I don't even know what the accusations were in the first place. But it's terrifying because I have seen so many removed for unjustly, and then it's next to impossible to get them back. I've seen parental rights terminated on children that were never in danger in the first place.
Which isn't how it's supposed to be. I mean, kids are supposed to be in imminent danger for them to even have standing to be able to do something. And it's just, it's kind of crazy.
It's insane. I think people trust the system without bothering to learn how it actually works. I think they end up in danger.
They make a lot of assumptions.
And a lot of judgments.
I mean, they just make assumptions.
And a lot of judgments.
If children were taken away, then clearly you deserved it. And that's not always the case.
Right, absolutely.
I would say maybe 10% of the times it's actually the case.
Right. And I don't think unless there's imminent danger, a child should be removed. I mean, like you said before, you can provide in-home services without removing a child.
Yes, and most of the time, you think about, physical abuse and domestic violence and, being sexually molested and all that. Those are the cases that rarely they actually find anything because they can't really prove it.
Right. And you have to have...
And those are the cases that should be, in those situations. And I have yet to actually see that happen.
I've seen a few, but it almost always requires disclosure from the child. And how rare it is for a child to feel safe disclosing that. So unless it's situations like, there was like a 12-year-old got pregnant. That was the only way they finally could prove it.
Yes.
Things like that. Or if they have left physical damage on a child. But even in that case, I've seen a girl who was burned with cigarettes, and you could tell they were cigarette burns, but she wouldn't disclose who did it. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't do anything because they say, well, she might have done it to herself. How do we know she's not a self-harmer?
Oh my God.
And it's pretty rare for kids to feel safe enough to disclose. And so,
Yeah, exactly.
in the cases where they are in danger, very often those are the cases they're not going to get removed.
Yep. They say normally you won't say anything.
I mean, why would they? They're terrified.
Yeah, and even most of the time, because of the history of mental abuse that's been going on since they were little, they just don't. They can't.
You want to talk about raising daughters? I'm trying to figure out what fucking birth
Sure.
control to put my daughter on.
Oh,
Because here's the
I don't know how you're dealing with that.
Well,
I know.
here's the thing. Like, okay, she wants to go on the pill, which is fine. Okay, I was on the pill for a long time, and when I was young. But the thing is, I don't know that I can. I don't know. I don't feel okay about just assuming that she's going to take it at the right time and stay on top of that. Or she might one day in a few years decide, you know, babies are cute and it'll love me. Why don't I throw these away? So I kind of feel like a long term birth control that she can't remove might be best.
Yeah, and it's scary because even the birth control, I mean, it's what it does to you chemically too is not real great.
Right.
You know, and so it's a hard decision. Luckily, mine has not shown like hardly any, interest for the most part. But
how old is she?
She's 13.
Okay, so she's just a tiny bit older than mine.
Yeah, and I think there's been a lot of discussion about whether I think she likes boys, but I think that she may be bisexual.
Oh, we've crossed into that too. She came home to tell me she had a girlfriend, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I think she was trying to see if it was going to shock me, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah. So I mean,
be safe with her too.
Yeah, exactly. But I haven't had with her and that I haven't had near as much concern. She seems to be a little behind in that aspect, which is weird because in a lot of ways she's further ahead and more mature. But for some reason that just has not like blown into something that she's super serious. But she's also like a little OCD about germs and stuff, so I think that helps.
Oh, I feel her on that one. That's the scariest part for me. I'm like, don't kiss me, don't touch me. What are you doing?
Yeah, that's kind of helped with this. With mine is that, and she is also super confident, which I think helps because I know with my stepdaughter, she developed, this severe need and want for male attention to justify her self-esteem and how she felt about herself.
Right.
And that was terrifying. And so we definitely dealt a lot more with that with the older one than her because she's misconfident for the most part. We went through a little period where she was dealing with a girl at school that I think had really just truly bullied her to the point where her esteem was so low. But now that we've kind of come back around through that, she's back to, she doesn't need to feel validated from men or anybody else. And that really helps that. Hopefully that continues.
If not, they make great medication that'll help us get through this. Because
they better come up with something good.
All right, so
because I just don't want to be one of those parents who pretends like it's not going to happen. Same with the boys.
Right.
Pretending like they're not going to or telling them not to is not going to stop them from doing it.
Oh, absolutely. I buy condoms you can get a fishbowl full of them that's like 100 count on Amazon. It comes right to your door with Prime. And that is what I do. I buy that. And I don't care if their friends want to come get them. I'm like, I will hand them out to you all day long. I'm like, everybody use them. Please use them. Because you guys are 15 and we ain't trying to let you die over this.
My son's age in 8th grade, they're already passing around STDs.
Right. Well, that was my thing when he started having, the 15-year-old, he started having sex, I don't know, 12, 13, I don't remember, a few years ago. Time gets away from me. And that was the thing. I'm like, use these, please, for the love of God, use these. And there was a few kids who always seemed to need to use the bathroom when they came by my house. And I'm like, take handfuls of them. I don't care, but y'all please use them. Because there was one girl, they had this one female friend in common, and she was having sex with a few of them, I think. And I'm like, I said, please tell her if she needs to go to the clinic and get birth control, I will take her.
Yeah.
Because they were, like, she was afraid she was pregnant all the time, and they were passing around STDs, and I'm like, no, y'all use these, please. I don't understand parents who pretend.
Matter.
Right.
No, they're going to do it. It doesn't matter. I mean...
Well, they're genetically programmed, too. I don't understand if these parents don't remember what it was like to be that age.
No, and this whole mindset of if you give them those, or you give them prophylactics, or you give them birth control, then it's giving them permission. No, they're going to do it when they want to control for 2 years before I had sex and I had the same boyfriend. Right. And there was plenty of opportunity. So that's just not true. Kids are going to do it when they're ready or want to do it. You do not influence that.
Right. And I would rather they be prepared. Otherwise, they make that decision impulsively, and they weren't protected, and then you have to deal with that problem.
Yes. Oh, my God.
Use your brain, people. It's not that hard.
It must be.
Obviously.
Obviously. Have you watched the news lately?
Oh, my God. I was talking to a therapist. She's LPC, and she was telling me she sees a lot of adolescents, and she said... that is like the number one thing she hears from parents is, will you talk to them about sex? And she's like, what the fuck? I said, you know what? Why don't you just start a referral service? Send them to me for $150. I will do a sex workshop and teach these kids about sex. Because seriously, why are parents so afraid to talk to their kids about sex? And if they've waited till they're teenagers, it's way too fucking late.
Too late. Yeah, you are way too late. They've already YouTubed and Googled that shit. They Pornhubbed it.
I hope they Googled. Otherwise, they're learning all sorts of absolute foolishness from their friends. And dear God, that is some of the crazy stuff that they come up with. Because my daughter does come home and she's like, is this true? Is this true? And I'm like, no. And I need you to go back and tell your friends, no. That is not how it works.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my.
It's terrifying.
Where did you learn about sex? Did your mom talk to you?
Yeah, I think I was pretty open with my mom, so it was always, a pretty much open conversation. So that, and then, I used to get my dad's magazine, so there's that too.
Oh, really?
Of course.
My dad.
Boundaries.
Right. My parents dad, I don't know whose stuff was what. I don't care. Every now and then I would hear the video or whatever, because this was a million years ago when there were actually
the VHS tapes.
VHS tapes. And I'm sure DVDs at some point there was a crossover. I don't remember when that happened, but and I found the collection at one point because I broke into, there was a filing cabinet they kept them in, and I learned how to pick the lock because that's where they kept my I worked since I was 12, right? And was saving money up for like when I was 16 to get a car, and they had hidden my money in that in that file cabinet.
Your own money?
Yeah, because I was running away when I was 14. So so I had to have some cash, right? So I went and stole my money, and porn was in there. And I remember being, angry's not the word, but I was just very, I don't know what the word is. Because it wasn't the fact that that it was porn, because I already knew they watched porn, because, I'd hear it every now and then. But I remember just being this irrational level of angry with him because he's a preacher and he's telling people that this is wrong. And you've got a fucking drawer full of porn? I'm like, how does that work? I did say that to him years later. And he's like, well, when you get to be a certain age, you need a little help. I'm like, that's not my point. My point is, it's completely hypocritical to say this is wrong, and then you're doing it. That's my point.
Yeah. Yes, and I hate it when people do that. That's just like my number one thing. I absolutely hate it when people just are hypocrites about stuff. It's like, why? You don't have to say anything about it.
Right, and he was big about preaching that, and then teaching that whole concept that a lot of Protestant churches have moved to, where anything about even a thought about another person that's not your spouse is adultery.
Yeah.
So, he's teaching all of that. Meanwhile, he's spending money to watch to watch all this, and I'm like, how can you do that? How can you shame and guilt these people on Sunday, and then knowing you watched that shit last night? Like, pick a lane.
Oh my goodness. What else did you lie about?
Right? Well, God knows.
Everything.
Oh, he's gonna be so mad if he ever hears this.
We'll both be in big trouble.
Oh yeah, because my parents were always super about that. What happens here stays here. You don't talk about family business outside. And then of course I grew up to be me, and I do nothing but talk about family business everywhere.
It's fun. You have to let it out.
Well, the thing is, I figure people relate better, especially when I do these public speaking or the workshops. People relate better to stories, and I don't feel okay telling other people's stories, so I just tell mine.
Yeah, I know.
And then I get all sorts of problems from that. But it's okay. Well, I took down my blog. I used to have a blog for years. And I ended up taking it down because that was a complaint in my youngest son's custody suit. He brought that up because one of my speeches had been published, and then I reblogged it, and it mentioned his abusive behavior. It did not mention him by name. It didn't say any horrible things that he did. It just mentioned his abusive behavior. And he was trying to say that made me unfit for custody. And so it was
that seems like a stretch.
It was, but it was this long, protracted thing, and and we're going to trial, and you know what a big deal that is. And so I just pulled it down. I just pulled the whole thing down because I'm like, I'm not fighting over this shit. This is ridiculous. You're not going to use this to leverage.
Yeah. It's not worth it.
Yeah, so that's why I don't have it anymore. Of course, now I'm doing the podcast, so we'll see how that goes, but whatever. I've had
I love like a polar thing. I'm either super private, but then when I share, it's like way too much information. So there's like no filter there. You don't get it coded. So it's hilarious because in some ways I'm so private, but if I'm going to talk about it, then there's not going to be a filter there.
Which is why I asked you on the podcast, because that's the whole point, is to just lay it all out there, and we're unfiltered and no shame, just put it out there.
Yes, well, hopefully it is what it is. I mean, right. I am who I am, and so it's like there's no point in hiding it. So
I wish more people could get to that, and that's what I'm hoping comes out of this.
I know. That would be good.
So tell us where we can find your art and your blog.
Okay, the blog, which is bookedandloaded.com, and then all my art typically is on warpedbydesignart.com, although I really suck at posting anything on there at all, so it's embarrassing, skimpy, but it does exist.
I have the same problem. There's 6 things in my store on my art page, and I'll see when the alert when people come on, and I'm like, there's nothing for them to shop. But if they go to your websites, are there links to your social media pages so they can follow there?
Yes, all the social media all interlinks, because I've never broken off the art from my established stuff, because originally that's where my sales were coming from, were from authors placing orders and stuff like that. So I have never, and I'm still on the fence about whether it's a good idea to break it off or not. So everything really links to the same stuff. I mean, they have separate Facebook pages, but Instagram is all the same, and Twitter is all the same, and just the Facebook pages. But that's pretty much it.
You can contact the podcast at brokebrokenpodcast@gmail.com. The Broken Podcast can be found on Twitter at Broke Broken Show, on Instagram and Facebook at Broke Broken Podcast.